Hello, my name is Sarah, and welcome to my Mississippi Field Notes, a series wherein I will be meeting with my peers to explore how they navigate heritage, change, and their sense of belonging as residents of the state. Along the way, we'll engage with the lived experiences of its people, challenging common misconceptions about Mississippi. In this episode, join us for a thoughtful conversation with Sam as she explores her journey through higher education and teaching in Mississippi's Pine Belt. From navigating the perspectives of professors who are transplants to challenging her own assumptions about rural education, Sam reflects on the surprises, tensions, and opportunities that she has encountered. As well, we'll discuss the deep intertwining of faith and tradition in the region and how Sam's faith shapes her approach to teaching as a kingdom-minded educator. Thank you for being here. Can you share a bit about your journey in pursuing higher education in Mississippi?
Sure. So I did my undergrad at William Carey in English, and while I was there getting my education certificate, I just had a rough patch with my student teaching, and I just didn't really feel like that was what I was supposed to be doing, and I was a bit unsure. And I've always wanted to have my PhD in something. When I was younger, I had my own plan for my life, and the Lord kind of flipped that on its head and told me that's not what I'm supposed to be doing. So I went into the world of education starting in college, and I've always had my heart set on a doctorate of some sort. And so while I was getting my undergrad, I knew that I didn't want to go straight into teaching. And I was like, you know what, I'll just apply for my master's program, and I'll apply for the scholarship, and if Southern will take me on as a GA, I will get my master's, and I know that's what I was supposed to be doing. That's the plan that I'm supposed to do. And if I don't get it, or if I have to pay for it, then it's just to the teaching world I go, and that's confirmation that that's the way that I'm supposed to go as well.
Yeah. How many of your professors were transplants of Mississippi?
All of them.
Really?
Yes.
How was that?
It was difficult at times because they didn't all have the same background knowledge as those of us in the room, because all of the master students were natives. Now, most of the PhDs were transplants, which is weird. And then all of the professors were also transplants. And so there was just a divide in the room between worldview and the way that we approach things, or background knowledge when it would come to discussing literature, because all of our classes were, we've all read this same piece or we've read the same book, now we're going to come into class and discuss it through a certain lens or critical theory, but we all had a different take because we all came with different knowledge. And it was different based on where you were geographically. We had international students who were, I'm sure they felt completely isolated. And at least some of us, natives, there were maybe one or two of us who were like, yes, you know where I'm coming from as someone from around here. So
how did worldview perhaps differ?
So I was in a medieval literature class, and we studied Chaucer, who is before the Reformation, so everyone's Catholic, supposed to be, at that time. And the professor, who was from the Washington, Seattle area, studied the theology of salvation and penance, and that's her whole degree. That's her area of study, everything that she's published. And so we're talking about the wife of Bath, and she is this strong, powerful woman figure, which is not common in the 12th, 13th century. And those of us who are from here have some sort of knowledge about the Bible, whether they have any sort of ties to faith or any certain religion or denomination. Growing up in the South in general, you have some sort of knowledge about the Bible. So we were talking about, oh, she's referring to this prophecy, or we're referring to this sort of area in the Bible, because Chaucer alludes a lot to biblical references. And this girl who was in her second year of PhD next to me was like, well, I know nothing about the Bible, but these are my thoughts on this passage of scripture. And I just kind of looked at her. And even my professor, who is not from here but has studied at least biblical things for her degrees, was like, that's an interesting take. And so like for the rest of the week, my classmates and I, who were all in like our first semester, we were like, why even comment on it if you say you don't know anything? Like there's no point to even enter the discussion, because like we were all having that discussion based on this knowledge of this thing. So there was things like that, or I was trying to write a paper for another professor on how Dracula is a Protestant novel. It's traditionally accepted as Catholic. And so I used this one article's argument setup to say, hey, this is how they argue that it's Catholic. Based on her model, I'm going to argue how it's Protestant. And this professor, who's from the Virginia area, so it's, some people would consider it as the South. No. I do not consider it as the South. But some people over there consider that that's the South. Anyways, she commented back and said, this is not an original argument. You can't argue that because you cite an article that says the same thing that you're saying. I'm like, we're saying two different things. One is Catholic and one is Protestant. We're saying two opposite things. There was an entire religious war over this. And so it just caused, I guess, being from the South and having certain just knowledge of faith and religion, like Christianity in the South, typically like Baptist or Presbyterian or Methodist around here. My professors who weren't from here didn't have that same background knowledge, and so it was kind of hard to like help base an argument off of like some biblical or religious standings when they didn't know any of it, because they just didn't grow up in it.
Right. What tensions or surprises did you encounter regarding the way your professors approached education compared to the expectations you had?
Gotcha. So, as master's students, we got to teach for our second year. And so we all sat down in meetings, and I expected that they were going to, help us plan a syllabus, plan how to do our classes, maybe help us navigate grading, that sort of thing. Because we've all graded before, but not as the professor or the instructor. And we get in there, and they are talking about different societal issues and how you as the instructor may have a more progressive view. But your students are from the South, and so they may hate you for the way that you look or think or act. And we had like a 3-hour meeting on how to conduct yourself as someone who thinks differently than these Southern kids. Or we had norming sessions about, and they meant it from like a nice place, I think, but as someone who's from here, they're like, typically when I was in my, program up at, whatever, University of Michigan or from the North in the Midwest somewhere, when I was grading, I would grade at this level of rigor. But we have to think of the background of these kids and the high schools that they went to and the level of education that they have coming into here. So let's lower our standards when we're grading a little bit. And I'm just like, as someone who's from here, who's in this program, where 4 of us were from here, no. Like, I disagree. Yeah. And so there was some tension between, like, just tell me how to teach my class. Help me conduct lessons. Help me plan a college class. Because I've done secondary. I've done 8th and 10th grade, but I hadn't done I'm walking in as a 21-year-old on my first day of class, and there's an 18-year-old sitting there. I'm like, that's a little intimidating. Right. Some imposter syndrome. And so I'm like, I know these kids because most of them are from here. Right. Or they're international students. They're either from here or they're from the Middle East or Europe. It's like, we're good on the education side. Like, we'll get them there. Teach me how to teach them and not worry about the other kind of stuff.
Yeah. How did you navigate that?
Just kind of smiled and nodded. And you're like, okay. And then some of my classmates would make comments about how we're from the same place as they are. Yeah. Or they would start agreeing with them. They'd say, well, I'm not in that camp as them, but the people who I was in class with, yes, they were. They were not as smart. So yeah, because they just wanted to, I guess, fall in line and be along with that. And I just was like, no. So I, in my own class, held them to a higher standard.
How did your time in university challenge or even affirm your perspective on Mississippi and its culture?
I think it challenged how, like, we as natives look at ourselves, especially teaching a younger generation now, having been through that, like higher ed, and still teaching higher ed classes at the high school level, like those seniors who are enrolled in college classes. I want them to kind of break those barriers and exceed these expectations that these professors have for them. And so, like, it challenges me to, like, be a better teacher and to be a better student for them. But it was just really hard to, like, hear these things and be like, but we're not what you think of us. But you look at the vast majority of the state or the demographic at some of our high schools, and you see validity in some of these comments. But just because it's maybe half and half, like maybe half of these people, of these assumptions that you have are true, doesn't mean that we're all like this. As 100% of the master's program at Southern was all Mississippi natives. Every master's student was from here. So if you are if you think of us so lowly, why are we even here? Right. And we're dominating your master's program, all as graduate assistants, and working for you. You're paying us to be here at this point. So I mean, that was really hard. But like it's also like a motivator to do more and be better, and to, even when I don't want to be there or didn't want to be there and felt like just another day of people, because it gets hard and monotonous sometimes. It was that extra push to be like, nope, you're going to go be that student. You're going to be that kid that's going to show them how it's done and outshine some PhDs, because you're in mixed classes at that point. Right. And so your papers are being set up with second or third year PhD students, and you're a day one master's kid. So
yeah, that's a lot.
I'll bet.
Transitioning into your teaching, what geographical region of Mississippi do you teach in?
We are called the Pine Belt, but it's Purvis, Mississippi, so it's a lot of country kids, farming. FFA is really big at our school, so just country, town, small. Yeah. Everyone has a lot of land and they don't want to sell it, Yes. So when you first began teaching in, I suppose, rural Mississippi, what assumptions did you bring with you? Coming from like my student teaching, which was from an even smaller school, I was expecting to have some like behavioral challenges, just because they would be kids who'd rather be riding their four-wheeler. They'd rather be anywhere else other than at school, because most of their parents are hard workers, which is amazing, and they work out in the fields or in the oil fields or in a trade somewhere. And so like I've seen that presenting a lot of like behavioral issues because they're just disinterested. And so I was kind of expecting that coming in teaching ninth graders and these these seniors who are enrolled in college classes. Like, I really hope that you actually want to take this class, because there was also, while I was in my master's program, there were some differing opinions on dual enrollment classes, and that some of it was to avoid, like they would just put kids in dual enrollment so that they would not have to state test them. And so they may not necessarily be ready for Comp 1. They just didn't want to have them on their statistics, which I have found is a gross misconception and it is completely wrong. Like, these kids are more than ready for college, and if you state tested them, they'd score everyone out of the water. But I would say, like, behavioral and disinterest was my biggest, like, I needed that classroom management to be there.
How did your assumptions evolve over time?
The ones who came from families who valued hard work over, like, textbook scores were my hardest workers, and they wanted to be there the most. I had the president of the FFA, our vice president, and so, like, they spent a week in Indianapolis when they had a rough draft and a final draft due for their final unit, and some of these kids needed to score an A to finish with an A in the class, and they turned it on time and they got an A. And they did everything while they were in Indiana, going to bed at midnight, waking up at 5 a.m. Wow. And they still did all of their work for my class and got it done, and were on it the whole time. Like, they exceeded expectations, and even, like, my 9th graders who may not want to be there still don't give me that many issues. We kind of just have, like, a fun, relaxed environment, but we still get everything done.
Perhaps in your time in university, or even outside of it, what are some misconceptions that you've encountered about rural Mississippi or teaching in rural Mississippi?
So we're in Lamar County for teaching in the school district, which is, like, the 6th largest district in the state. And it is the best district as far as, like, scores and funding and all that kind of stuff for our area, from, like, here to the Gulf Coast. And one of, like, the misconceptions is that Purvis was, like, the worst school to be at, or, like, the second lowest, because we have another high school who's even, like, more rural than us. But one of the biggest things was, like, oh, y'all are because of district rivalry, like, y'all are the worst school in our district. You bring our test scores down, because test scores are really big. You know, you're country bumpkins, or you don't have as much money as us. So, like, your sports aren't as good. Like, we're just the underdog. But state scores came out, and we were the first in the district.
Wow, yeah.
We've had the least amount of, like, disciplinary issues.
Wow.
We haven't been in the news, which is great. We've had some issues at our, like, biggest school in the district, as far as, like, you know, kids getting into trouble and officers having to step in on campus. And so, like, we've had one lockdown threat, and that's about it. And it still wasn't that bad. Like, we weren't in any immediate danger. It was precautionary. But there's, like, the other schools in the area are struggling a bit more in different areas, but come to find out, our football team was not the best this year, but we almost made it to playoffs, which has never happened, like, almost ever. Our volleyball team won state championships this year. Our softball team was, like, 2nd in the state last year, and I'm pretty sure we're on track to win it this year. Our soccer team has had the most winningest season we've ever had. So, like,
you guys are on fire.
Purvis is killing it this year. But coming in, people were like, if they were at other schools, Purvis people are very proud of Purvis. And if you go to Purvis, you're like, that's my school. Like, very small town, like, pride. Or, like, that is my school, or I graduated from there. But if you're from any of the other schools, they're like, gross. And so, like, there's all that kind of stuff, but we are number 1. And what matters most, which is test scores to the state. They care most about that, so we've made it. Because people at university, even when I told them, I was like, I got the job. And they're like, oh, really, where? And it's like, Purvis High School. And they're like, they were like, oh, well, at least you're still in Lamar County. Like, the consolation prize is you're still in the best district. just not the best school. I'm like, I don't want to be at the other schools. I could have. I didn't want to be there. Like, no, that's the school I want. So it is. We're killing it.
As you are working in a context where religion and tradition and heritage are so deeply intertwined, how do you navigate that intersection in the classroom?
Well, so it is public school, and so you have to be careful about like, how you discuss faith or even like religious topics. But I am in like the Pine Belt area, Bible Belt. So like all these kids know the Bible for the most part. They all go to church of some sort, and parents are really chill about talking about it. And so like we will open and close staff meetings with prayer.
Wow.
I had a Christmas party with the staff at our principal's house. We prayed for dinner. And I mean, that's just staff. But our softball team will post something and they post a Bible verse. Or one of our girls got saved and baptized at my church, and the whole softball team showed up and they posted a picture, like the softball team did, with the school's name on it. And so there's not like any big complaints, but like we're still not, you're not allowed to teach your faith.
Right.
But I am blessed to work in English where I can still like intertwine my background knowledge and their background knowledge to be like, hey, so you know like how, like when we're teaching theme, and I'm like, so when you are interpreting a Bible verse and how you have to interpret the meaning, just, you know, you may not understand every word in the verse, but you understand the message. I was like, that's a theme. I was like, so you take that over into literature. Or we talked about like outlining a paper and having like 3 main points. And I was like, I'm like trying to think of examples quickly on my feet because I didn't think of those beforehand. I was like, okay, so because they weren't getting it and I needed another way to connect. It's like, how many of you have gone to church? Just how many of you have attended any church service ever? I was like, does the pastor normally have like points? And they're like, yeah. I was like, okay, let's do a 3-point sermon, right? You have 1, 2, and 3. There's your paper.
Right.
Introduction, points, conclusion. Like, oh, that makes so much sense.
Right.
There we go.
It's like a form of contextualization.
Exactly. So like we can use that background knowledge of faith or just being from this area to kind of relate these more confusing or hard to conceptualize English ideas and concepts with like what we know. And since I'm so familiar with them, and most of my kids are, we can kind of have that dialogue without being like, I'm forcing you to believe these things. Because we'll still, someone asked a question one day, we said something about Adam and Eve. I was like, yes, well, sin originated in Genesis with Adam and Eve. I was like, if you believe that, you know, like you have to give that caveat. And so I never have asserted like in class, in front of the whole class, I've never asserted like, yes, these are all of my beliefs.
Right.
But we have referenced them. And I'm like, no matter what you believe, we're going to talk about this book real quick. Because if you're teaching it as a work of literature, by all means.
Right. How has your faith shaped the way that you approach education or even like cultural differences and tensions in the classroom?
My faith for sure has like influenced the way that I treat everybody like as equals. Because like Jesus came and died for everyone. Like no matter what you look like, how you act, like this Western idea of Jesus, like Jesus is not white. So like he didn't come for the white people. He wasn't even white. You know, like he wasn't here for the Europeans. People think it's a European faith. It's not. He was Middle Eastern.
Right.
So if you have students who are Middle Eastern and you're a teacher who's scared because of like stereotypes or different things happening in the world, how can you conduct a classroom? Or how can you treat all of your students equally when they're mixed if you have a prejudice towards one or the other? Like Jesus came and died for us all, but he also said like you are all equal and you are fearfully and wonderfully made in my image. So like if we're all made in the image of God, then you're all worth something. You're all deserving of love. And we all may have different home lives, and we all may have a different idea of love, but that means that I'm going to respect you that way. So you should respect me in that way. But we're also going to have that same like respect for each other. Like I'm not going to tolerate, we may pick on each other, because that's my personality, is to be sarcastic and joking. But you know, it's not going to be to hurt your feelings. And it's not going to be with a student who that student and I have a little bit of like animosity, like if something happened. I'm not going to joke with that student if I know that that's going to be a problem, if they don't like me for some reason, or if they're having a bad day. Like no one deserves that. So it's having that understanding and treating them how they are on that day, but also just knowing that like I don't care what your past teacher says about you, you're different in my class. Like clean slate. I don't want to know what your history is, because when you come into my room, like you have a chance to redo it. I had 10 freshmen right now, not the same 10 that I started with, but still 10. 3 of them are different because 3 have gone to alt school and 3 have replaced them. Some of them are on behavioral plans. Some of them have legal, like actual legal issues now. Some are now at the youth challenge. Like they're asking me to fill out paperwork on them and asking for my insight in their behaviors. I'm like, I have none. Like other than they did my work, they said yes ma'am, and they didn't get in, like I never got onto them. I've never contacted their parent for anything other than they're doing great. Sorry. And like, because it doesn't matter to me what you've done in the past, and I'm not going to treat you like it's a little nerve-wracking as a teacher to be like, oh my gosh, my kid who was at alt school for the last 90 days for something is like, they're starting. Okay. But you have to act like it doesn't bother you when they walk in. And both of those students who've returned are angels. They may be behind on work because they don't come to school sometimes, but they're emailing me right now, turning in work before the end of the semester. So like, you know, just treat them as you want to be treated. Love your neighbor as yourself.
As an educator in the South, what unique opportunities do you have as a kingdom-minded professional?
So starting the school year, 2 of my coworkers go to my church. And so I've known them for 4 years, and now we're coworkers. My principal used to go to my church. But then when she got the vice principal job in Purvis, she went to First Baptist Purvis to like be in the community more, which is understandable. And now she's the principal. So like she's in Purvis life more. But with that in mind, my now coworkers already knew me. And before I was even like signed my contract, one of them was like, hey, you're going to be my FCA co-sponsor. So like the first Wednesday I'm co-sponsoring FCA.
Wow.
I'm like praying with kids. I'm talking about Jesus in front of all of them. And so my students who didn't know me, but for a week, I'm like, you need to write a literacy narrative. And it's for a college class, and submitting any paper that discusses religion for a college that's not a Bible college or a Baptist or religious university is nerve-wracking, because you're like, I don't know if that's even allowed or if my professor's going to like that, or especially at school. You never know how a teacher's going to grade it. But I think like me being able to lead FCA, their first paper was a literacy narrative, which is just like, tell me a story about something that you became literate in. Could be anything. How you became to know yourself, how you learned how to drive a car or work on cars, or, you know, do photography, something like that, any skill. And one kid was how he like found himself and like found his self-worth. That was his literacy narrative. And it was all about church. And he told me like the only reason he felt comfortable writing on that subject was because I was an FCA. And the morning that I presented this unit to them, like the paper, was the morning that I spoke. And I talked about, I don't even remember what I talked about. I think it was just about like hecticness of life and like being still. So it's given me opportunities for my kids to like feel comfortable expressing themselves in their assignments and just like being themselves and being more comfortable in the classroom, because no one wants to feel like they can't be themselves or write on a topic that they want to write on out of fear of getting a bad grade.
As someone that is rooted in this community, how are you pursuing academia, teaching as a way to intentionally invest in the next generation here?
So, in my own studies, I'm going to go back to hopefully get my PhD in either English or special education because my niece has special needs, and so I will kind of want to be there. I'm going to stay at my school that I'm at because this is the school that she'll feed into, to keep an eye on her, mainly to be there. But especially if I'm in special ed, like I can walk through that kind of stuff with her and know more about that situation. But also, like, I want to teach at a university level one day. And so whether it's teaching future teachers just in general, or teaching future special needs teachers, or just teaching English, those are all things that I want to do. And so, like, right now I'm teaching for a local community college. Like, I'm doing their classes at our high school. But also, I have to go back and take a few more courses, I think, to get a physical education endorsement so I can coach, because now that's mandated, I think, by the state. For anyone who's going to coach, you have to have a PE endorsement. Well, I didn't get that in undergrad because that wasn't a thing 3 years ago or 7 years ago now. That wasn't just came up during this school year. And so I have to go back and take some classes. So I'll be looking for a university that'll let me teach and maybe do full-time coursework to get it done faster, and then go take a praxis and do all that kind of stuff. But coaching is another way to connect. Like, the girls already know that I love basketball, and they already, like, really want me to help out with their team and all this kind of stuff. And so, like, the basketball team already comes in my room all the time. I don't even know these girls. I don't know half of their names. I'm like, what are you doing here? Yeah, but, like, I teach 2 or 3 of them. Okay. And so the 2 or 3 of them, like, we'll talk basketball. They didn't even know that I, like, much. I would just ask them about it. And so the boys team, like, we'll talk basketball. And so, like, that's just a way, like, I connect with random kids that I don't even know. Because it's hard as a first-year teacher when these other teachers in the hallway know 75% of these names. And I'm like, if your butt's not in my classroom, I don't know your name. Yeah. But also having, like, going to my church, there's 5 or 6 of them that do go to my church. And so, like, I know them, and now their friends know me. And so then they come to my class, or they'll stop and say hey when they pass by. And so, that really helps. But no, I mean, like, I'm going to have to go back to school for PE classes to then possibly coach and then be with those kids all the time. And then a PhD, because then I'll teach college one day, fingers crossed. If not, I'll just be a shoo-in for our dual enrollment classes, which I love to teach. You know, just
a lot to look forward to.
Yep, continuing to connect with all these kids and make them better and prove all these university people wrong.